Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Tales from a Retro Gamer. Today I'm going to be talking about the Intellivision Amico once again, but I've got a different twist on it. I'm going to be talking about it as someone who's looking forward to it from the standpoint of someone who lived through the great video game crash of 1983. I think I have an unusual perspective on this console. You have to be a certain age, to live through that era, and I think that gives me just maybe a different opinion on the console coming out and why I'm excited about it. But before we get to that, I have to mention James Pledger. He is a designer who does channel art and ads and branding and logos and design and all this kind of stuff. He's done a lot of my channel art, and he did this new intro and outro. So thank you so much, James Pledger. I'm going to put the link to his website in this video, so just check that out. Check out his page. He does all kinds of design work. So if you're a YouTuber or you need any kind of branding or signage, check out James Pledger's website, which I will put in the link below. All right, guys. So the Intellivision Amico, I'm super excited about it, and I know a lot of people my age, mid to late 40s, early 50s or whatever, that are really looking forward to this console. Like I said, it's a retro themed console that's gonna bring back a lot of the Intellivision IPs from back in the day, and a lot of us are really excited about it. Now, what does this have to do with the great video game crash of 1983, you may wonder? So around the early 80s, there were several consoles that were competing for our attention, and they all ended up failing in one sense or another, and then we were waiting for the next console to replace those with something, with better graphics, something newer and more exciting. And let me go through each console and tell you why this leads up to me really looking forward to the Intellivision Amico today. Let's start off with the Atari 2600. Now, that was a great system. It has a lot of excellent games. There are still around 30 or so titles I still play on a fairly regular basis today. A great system, but it didn't get the upgrade we wanted. When the Atari 2600, in the early 80s, it was starting to show its age. The graphics seemed simplistic, and the sounds and everything were primitive. And Atari came out with the Atari 5200. And that did indeed have better graphics, and but it was kind of a disappointment of a system because the non-centering controllers were really bad. We were all very disappointed with the 5200, this big bulky system with these non-centering joysticks. I like the console still today, and I liked it back then, but it was still a disappointment because of the controllers. And then the Atari 7800 came along, and it was kind of more of the same because we were disappointed with the controllers, the stiff joysticks, the side buttons. And it was just sort of more of the same because you got, sort of better versions of some of the arcade classics, but like Dig Dug and Joust and things, but it really wasn't quite the advance we were looking for. So let's go to now Atari. In 1993, they came out with the Jaguar, and it has some games that were a big advance over earlier titles. There's Defender 2000, which is sort of a modern futuristic take on Defender, and Missile Command 3D, and Tempest 2000. Those are all interesting games for retro gamers like myself, and they were a big advance over previous games of the same name that carried forward that IP, but there were just 3 titles like that, if I recall correctly, for the Jaguar. Now, the Intellivision Amico is going to have a whole bunch of games like that that are modernized with advanced graphics and sounds, versions of older games. And so that's, if you lived through the great video game crash, and you experience the death of some of your favorite consoles and how the next iteration of those consoles just didn't quite measure up to what you really wanted, you're probably looking forward to the Amico. So let's go to another console back then whose, carrying forward, it didn't quite go where we wanted it to go. The Odyssey 2. Now that was another system I like a whole lot, but the Odyssey 3, which was promised to have advanced graphics, including background graphics, what the Odyssey 2 didn't have. It was going to have better sounds, new games and everything. The Odyssey 3 never showed up in the United States. And they say it was released in Europe either just as a prototype or on a very small scale, because there are images of it online. I've never seen one myself. And the Odyssey 2, called the Video Pack in Europe, was very popular over there. So it apparently did carry forward in some fashion with the Odyssey 3 in Europe, but we never saw it here, and it wasn't the advancement we were wanting. I just envisioned an Odyssey 3 here in the States that would have a real keyboard, that would have really advanced versions of some of the games I loved, like Casey Munchkin, Casey's Crazy Chase, Killer Bees, you know, just all kinds of games for the Odyssey. I could just imagine how awesome the Odyssey 3 was going to be. Didn't happen here, not like we wanted it to. Let's go to the Intellivision itself. The Intellivision was once again a great console that I really enjoyed, but then when the Intellivision 2 came out, it was a disappointment. It was just a smaller, more compact version of the regular Intellivision. It was really not an upgrade. It played the same games. In fact, it did not play the Coleco branded games for the Intellivision. It did have detachable controllers, which was nice, but it was not much of an upgrade because it didn't play better, more sophisticated games, just the same old games. Now, the Intellivision 3 and the Intellivision 4 were rumored and promised and all that, but they were canceled. And I just, once again, I envisioned a futuristic Intellivision with, just advanced graphics of some of our favorites, Major League Baseball, NFL football, Astro Smash, and all these games with 2D gameplay and just, simple to set up, simple to play. Really looking forward to this. And back in the early 80s, that's kind of how I envisioned consoles to evolve into just sort of the next generation of games that had all these, old IPs, but more modern and futuristic. And there are some of those that exist today, but I'm going to get to that in a little bit, some modern games based on the classics, but we'll get to those in a little bit. Now, this is not to be confused. The Intellivision 3 that I mentioned, that was just, that was canceled, that's not to be confused with the INTV System 3, which was sort of a sequel to the Intellivision 2, put out by INTV, which acquired, Intellivision from Mattel. All it was a black console, a little bit redesigned with an LED light. Again, not really an upgrade because it played the same old games. Anyway, so the history of the Intellivision and its sequels is kind of a convoluted, long story. If you go to blueskyrangers.com, you can find the whole history of those Intellivision, the further iterations. And so anyway, once again, we were disappointed that the Intellivision didn't carry forward like we wanted it to. And to me, that's what the Intellivision Amico is going to be. Let's go to the ColecoVision. Now, to me, this was the biggest disappointment of all. I loved the ColecoVision. It was a great console, but there were a couple things that were a little disappointing about it. Games like Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. and a few others, Rock and Rope, were missing one of the 4 screens that you found in the arcade game, and they were missing, like Donkey Kong, you're missing the intermissions, and the Super Game module was promised. This was going to be sort of like an expansion module for the ColecoVision. This was going to have, better graphics, better sound effects, all the animations, the intermissions, and more futuristic games, better, the whole works. It was just going to be the ColecoVision carried forward, the great games we loved, just better, new and improved, as it were. And with the Intellivision Amico, that's how I see this. And the Super Game module was canceled, and instead Coleco focused on the Atom computer. I didn't want a computer back then. I didn't really know much about computers. I didn't really have a use for one. I'd never programmed a computer before. That just wasn't something I'm interested in. But I was interested in a more futuristic version of the ColecoVision, which I thought we were going to get with the Super Game module, but it was canceled. Now, in recent years, there has been a Super Game module of sorts that's come out by an independent company, but that's a tale for another time. So anyway, that was a big disappointment. Now, carrying forward, the NES did, in fact, advance gaming. In the U.S., it was released, test marketed in '85, and then it came out in '86 across the country. Now, this was an advancement. I did love the NES, but it wasn't really the step forward that I originally envisioned. Just really awesome versions of the earlier games. It was, in fact, breakthrough. With Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Super Mario Brothers. It was a revolutionary console, but it went in a different direction than anyone really could have predicted, at least us, in the early 80s when we didn't really know much of how video games were going to evolve. And so the NES was not a disappointment, it was just different. And so the Intellivision Amico, to me, is going to be the console that picks up where the old systems left off, the Atari 2600, the Odyssey 2, the Intellivision, and the ColecoVision, and went forward. And to me, that's when, I think I've talked to a lot of guys my age and a little younger, a little older, that are so excited about the Amico because of that very thing. because it's going to bring us back these old IPs. It's going to have arcade classics like Moon Patrol and Burger Time, just advanced versions of these with, you know, different screens and advanced graphics and more levels or whatever. And that's going to bring back a lot of the great Mattel IPs like Astro Smash and Night Stalker. And now, before you know, I know what you're thinking. There are some games for, you know, systems that came out after the, you know, 2600 and ColecoVision and all that, that did do this to some extent. Now, I mentioned the Jaguar earlier and Defender 2000. I do have the boxed Defender 2000. It's a pretty decent game. It's not perfect. Tempest 2000 is a lot better. And that's just one example. And there are examples for a lot of different systems. The Space Invaders 91 for the Genesis is this would be perfect for the Amico, kind of an advanced version of Space Invaders. I love Space Invaders 91. It's one of my most played Genesis games. And see, I envision the Amico as having a ton of these kind of games. You know, just games I love, but, you know, with advanced graphics and you know, more levels and more weapons and all that. Ultimate Kicks is another version. Some people call it Quicks. Another, you know, based on an old classic Kicks that cranked it up a notch. I actually prefer the original Kicks to this, but again, it's a pretty neat game with that, you know, modernizes the original Kicks. One of my favorite games like this is Q*bert 3 for the Super Nintendo. It's a really great upgrading of the original Q*bert, and there's also a Q*bert for the PlayStation that has, you know, kind of adventure mode, and there are Frogger games that have done this. Pac-Man World for the PlayStation, Pac-Man to the Extreme, you know, with scrolling levels and worlds and all that stuff. And this is how I see the Amico, is having these kinds of games, but a system totally devoted to modernized, you know, and not always necessarily, you know, these, you know, classic IPs, but also just who knows what they've got in store. You know, original games with this same type of gameplay, you know, the 2D Twitch gameplay that I love so much. And you know, I've got a lot of hope for the Amico, and I'm super excited about it. Now, speaking of even more newer consoles, I love my Xbox 360. And the two games I play the most that are sort of like this, like modern versions of some classics, Pac-Man Championship Edition and Galaga Legions, which is on the Namco Museum Virtual Arcade. I love both of these games. These are two of my most played games on the 360. And I can see with the Amico, I just envision a lot of games like this that take the classics, you know, and up the ante a lot with just awesome sound, awesome graphics, and just more expansive gameplay, but not so expansive where you're free, you know, where you're roaming around in 3D worlds getting lost. Not that kind of thing, because it's a 2D system and a 2.5D system. And so to me, and I've noticed some younger gamers that maybe don't quite get it, why the Amico is a thing. They're just like, oh, well, those are just mobile games on your TV, or that's just, you know, that's just like the, you know, the Atari VCS. Not the original VCS, but the confusingly named Atari VCS that's supposed to come out at some point that's like a retro console based on the old Atari 2600. I see it differently. I think it's going to be a great system. Now, one thing about the Amico, like I said, a lot of people my age are really excited about it. Younger people, maybe they don't quite get what's going on, but if you lived through the great video game crash, like me, I think you're probably pretty excited for the system. Now, the Amico is going to be aimed at two major demographics. One is people, you know, my age, well into their 40s and 50s, and parents, families, you know, the whole couch co-op thing. Well, Tommy Tallarico definitely has that covered. He's done just a ton of, you know, marketing and moving forward. He said they're going to literally spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on marketing to families and to parents, and to, you know, just to bringing gaming back to the living room, couch co-op, 4-player, and more. And that's neat, but I'm mostly excited about it because, like I've mentioned, living through the great video game crash gives me this perspective of having all these great classics revamped for modern times. All right, guys, let me know in the comments, if you lived through the crash, does that have any effect on how you look at the Amico? Does that make you look forward to it? Have you thought of that from this perspective before? Let me know in the comments. If you're younger and you don't quite get the Amico, or you're excited about it, let me know that as well. Now, speaking of comments, last week I did a video on my 5 most memorable Donkey Kong moments. And I asked you guys, you know, what are some of your memorable Donkey Kong moments? And Video Game Obsession commented on the YouTube episode, and he said, "My dad bought my brother and I a ColecoVision system with the Donkey Kong pack-in 1982 as well, but mainly to play Donkey Kong. We were blown away by it when trying it on a ColecoVision kiosk at a local Sears. It was a great port, which I still enjoy playing now. The one thing that makes it slightly better is to pause when climbing a ladder, then resume in the same direction. This will cause Mario, aka Jumpman, to climb twice as fast." Now, I remember using this trick. I discovered this pretty early on. That the same day I got my ColecoVision for Christmas, I remember that if you just push Mario up the ladder a bit and then push again, he would walk faster. That's kind of a glitch, but when you push it a second time, it made it fast, kind of like the arcade game. And then he says, Video Game Obsession goes on, "It's actually closer to the original arcade climbing speed since it's normally too slow. Mario does you climb pretty slow in ColecoVision unless you tap it a second time." All right. Thank you so much for that Video Game Obsession. I really appreciate those comments. So last week I did tell you guys I was going to show you my Donkey Kong collection. Now I will next week. Sorry about that, but this Amico topic with the great video game crash was just pressing on me. I really wanted to talk about it, but I will talk about my Donkey Kong collection next week, no matter what. All right, guys, thank you so much for liking the episode. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. You can check out my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/BrettWeiss. The latest addition to my Patreon page is Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman by Rob Strangeman. He's been a retro gaming community a long time. He's a really cool guy. He's a great writer, and it's a fantastic book. Anybody on the $3 tier or higher gets that book absolutely free, so just check that out if you like. Thank you so much for watching. We will talk to you guys later. Peace out. I will do that next week. This topic with the Amico.
Whoops.